What's up, YouTube? It's Chris with Murphy Firearms Training. So I was out with my youngest son the other day. It's his first year actually carrying the rifle deer hunting, and he says to me in the middle of a hunt, we're sitting in a deer stand and we're in the middle of nowhere, and he says, "Dad, I have a question." "Sure, what's up?" And he said, "Well, I feel like my bullet will always hit low looking at my rifle and my scope." And I said, "Well, let's talk about it afterwards." And so in his mind, what he explained to me on the walk back to the truck was the barrel and the scope look parallel. And so if you fire a bullet, it's going to go out on a straight line. And the scope is looking kind of in a straight line. And he guessed that you would always shoot 1 or 2 inches low. But then he said, "But when we went to the range and shot my rifle, it didn't shoot low. I don't understand." And I said, "Well, when we get home, let me draw it and see if it makes more sense." So I thought maybe some other folks had never seen this before, so I thought it'd be interesting to talk about. So you take your rifle and you fire your bullet. And as soon as you fire, it's going to start to drop. It's going to start to drop. Boom. Okay? Gravity takes a hold. Okay? No matter what you do, when you fire, it's going to drop. Okay? Now you've got this scope that's mounted higher than the bore axis. Here's your scope. And he was right about one thing, which is the scope actually does in fact make a straight line. The scope makes a straight line. That is a fact. The bullet, however, makes a curve. And so ideally, you're going to pick a distance, let's say like what I picked, okay, out here, 100 yards, okay, which is what a lot of folks will zero their optics at, okay. Doesn't really matter. It matters where you're shooting, not where you're zeroing, where you're shooting. That should decide where you zero, not some magic number. So like if your longest shot is 50 yards, having a 0 to 100 really doesn't help you. And your optic is going to make a straight line that looks something like this. Okay? And here's what happens. At the muzzle, you're in fact going to shoot lower than your sight line. And you can see that when you look at a scoped rifle. Somewhere not too far from the muzzle, you're going to cross paths. This thing's going to be dead on. And then somewhere between that point and 100 yards, you're actually going to shoot high. Okay? So if you zero your scope at 100 yards, it's very typical that if you go back to 25, 35, 50 yards, you're going to shoot high. Now, how high? Not very. With a cartridge like a 243, probably less than half an inch. Okay? Somewhere probably 0.2, 0.3 inches. But between, so if you had something you were shooting at that was, 5 feet off the muzzle, you would shoot low. At some point fairly close to the muzzle, okay, now that could be 15 yards, could be 40 yards, but somewhere in there you're going to have an accurate shot. It's going to be exactly where you're aiming. And then between that point and your 0 point, for me is 100 yards, you're going to shoot high. And then at 100 yards, you're going to be dead on again. And then for every point after 100 yards, you're going to shoot low. And the further away you get from the gun, the lower you get. Okay? And so, and then of course you've got some folks who play with this game where I want to be within 3 inches low and 3 inches high. Where should I set my zero? And that's really if you're doing longer range shooting. The longest range shot we have anywhere that we deer hunt is 120 yards. And so what I told my son was anywhere between here and here, you're going to be less than half an inch high. Between here and 120 yards, you're going to be less than half an inch low. We don't shoot out here, so we're not worried about it. Now, if we had a 250-yard shot, this would be a concern. This over here would be a concern. Well, we don't, okay? So anyway, I thought it'd be neat to show that. It was kind of a misconception he had, and he's 11. And he thought this was kind of eye-opening. The bullet actually curves downward towards Earth because of gravity. But the optic is a straight line, and so ideally, that straight line is going to intersect in two places. Every other place on that bullet path, you're either going to shoot high or you're going to shoot low. And, of course, you've got a spot here where you're shooting low, but I don't anticipate taking a shot at that close of a distance. That's going to be pretty close to the muzzle. But again, the maximum distance is going to be between the center of the optic and the center of the bore. His particular scope, the center of the optic is about 1.8 inches above the bore. And so worst case scenario, he's shooting 1.8 inches low. Okay, and that would be literally at the muzzle. So I don't anticipate him seeing an animal at the muzzle to shoot. But for the most part, you're going to be just a little low, just a little high, or dead on. And then when you get out here to a certain distance, you're going to start to get lower and lower and lower and lower to a point where you actually have to adjust your aim. We don't shoot that far at animals, so we don't have that concern. But I thought it'd be a fun thing to show. So anyway, if you have questions, guys, leave them in the comments. Appreciate you watching.